Jeremy Clarkson got sacked from the biggest show on television over a cold steak. So naturally, he bought a farm and became the most beloved farmer in Britain. Even his own farm manager told him, to his face, that the numbers don't add up. 20 weird facts about Clarkson's farm you're not getting anywhere else, plus a bonus involving a banned advert and the most expensive minute of TV in the country. Wellies on, this gets muddy fast. Number 1. Caleb Cooper was never cast in Clarkson's farm. He was already there. Before Jeremy Clarkson ever bought Diddley Squat, a young lad from the Cotswolds was working that same land, feeding his own calves for 50 pence an hour, learning the trade the only way anyone properly learns it, badly at first, then not at all badly. When Clarkson arrived with his questions and his confidence and precisely no practical farming experience whatsoever, Caleb was simply the person who happened to be standing there, already knowing the answers. Nobody auditioned him. Nobody coached him on how to be more telegenic. The producers just pointed a camera at a 21-year-old explaining, with the barely concealed exasperation of a man who has already answered this exact question 17 times before lunch, why the thing Clarkson wanted to do would not work. Britain adored him instantly, and today that farm boy has assets pushing towards £1 million. Not bad for someone who was never meant to be the star of the show at all. Number 2. Clarkson thought farming was, in his own words, going to be rather like Top Gear with sheep. He had the land. He'd skimmed the manual. He'd watched Caleb do it a few times and thought, how difficult can this really be? The Cotswolds, it turned out, had other ideas. The machinery cost more to repair than most people spend on a car. The crops failed for reasons that had nothing to do with effort and everything to do with weather, soil, and the sheer indifferent cruelty of agricultural economics. By the end of Series 1, Clarkson understood something he plainly hadn't grasped at the start, that farming isn't a hobby you charm your way through. It's a profession that will not be hurried and will not be flattered, no matter how famous you are. Number 3. Gerald Cooper, Caleb's mentor and the farm's resident drystone waller, is 79 years old, has lived his entire life in the Cotswolds, and is, when broadcast to a national audience, almost completely unintelligible. It isn't that Gerald doesn't make sense. He makes perfect sense to anyone who spent 60 years inside that particular accent, at that particular pace, using that particular rural shorthand built for people who already know exactly what you mean. The production team added subtitles. It barely helped. The words came through fine. The meaning underneath them, the pause that means don't you dare do that, the look that means I've seen this exact mistake made before and I know precisely how it ends, none of that translates onto a caption. And that's precisely why the nation fell for him. Gerald never once adjusted himself for the camera. He simply carried on being entirely, unapologetically himself, and audiences find that sort of thing almost impossible to resist. Number 4. When the farm shop opened, nobody was remotely prepared for what happened next. It looked charming in the trailer. A converted outbuilding, a few handwritten signs, some honey. What actually arrived was closer to a rural pilgrimage. Word spread, Amazon broadcast the series to rather a lot of people, and those people got in their cars. The lanes around Diddley Squat were built for the occasional tractor and a visiting relative at Christmas. They were not built for a 3-mile tailback of Range Rovers. Police had to manage the traffic. Furious parish council meetings followed, of the sort that, in England, tend to resemble the planning stages of a minor military campaign. And Clarkson, by every account, found the whole thing quietly magnificent. Number 5. Charlie Ison, the farm's long-suffering land agent, spends most of every series absorbing the consequences of decisions he was never once consulted on. He is, by some distance, the most competent person on that farm. Calm, knowledgeable, endlessly practical. And his job, more often than not, is to walk onto a scene, survey whatever fresh disaster Clarkson has arranged in his absence, and quietly find a way through it, anyway. He rarely raises his voice. He's clearly exhaustedly fond of the man, which perhaps makes Charlie the most relatable person in the entire programme, and certainly the least thanked. Right, 5 down, 15 and a bonus still to come, and it only gets stranger from here. If you're enjoying this, do hit that like button, drop a comment telling me which of these surprised you most, and if you haven't already, subscribe and tap the notification bell so you don't miss what's coming next on the channel. Now, back to the mud. Number 6. The council's most punishing restriction accidentally built Clarkson a farmers' cooperative. When West Oxfordshire District Council gave permission for the farm shop, they attached a condition that seemed almost designed to strangle it. Everything sold had to come from within 16 miles. No imports, no clever sourcing from London wholesalers, nothing beyond that tiny circle. Most business owners would have quietly given up. Clarkson instead built a network of local producers who now sell through his shop, taking a small cut while giving them access to thousands of customers they'd never have reached alone. His partner, Lisa Hogan, later admitted the council had, in her words, done them a favour, because they'd never have found half their suppliers otherwise. A restriction meant to limit him became one of the shop's greatest selling points. Number 7. The restaurant that never officially existed ran for exactly 1 calendar month. Clarkson wanted to convert a barn into a proper restaurant, serving beef, lamb and beer straight off the farm. The council said no, so he opened one anyway, in a lambing shed, on the strength of what he called a loophole. It lasted precisely 31 days, before an enforcement notice arrived and shut the whole thing down. A planning inspector later confirmed it had never been lawful in the first place. On paper, a total failure. On screen, it became the central drama of an entire series, watched by millions who'd never given planning law a second thought in their lives. Number 8. Every crop failure you've watched on that show was, quietly, exactly what the format needed. The potatoes rotted before he could sell them. The wheat didn't meet the standard for brewing. Pigeons destroyed an entire field of oilseed rape. The barley waterlogged. And the trout, the poor trout, were slowly picked off by otters and herons until barely any were left. Any one of those disasters would sink an ordinary farming operation. On Clarkson's farm, each one becomes a full episode, watched by millions, earning considerably more than the crop itself ever would have. Traditional farmers need their harvest to succeed. This particular farmer, rather unusually, needs them to fail spectacularly on camera. Number 9. There's an 8-second moment in the show that almost nobody talks about, and it might be the most honest thing ever filmed on that farm. Caleb is explaining quietly, and without any theatre about it, why the whole enterprise shouldn't really work. That an ordinary farmer, with the same land and the same costs, simply wouldn't survive. That the only reason any of it functions is Clarkson's fame. Clarkson doesn't deflect. He doesn't reach for a joke, which is normally his instinct whenever things get uncomfortable. He just nods. The programme moves straight on, and most viewers let it pass without a second thought. But that single nod explains everything that came after it. The brewery, the shop, the pub, the merchandise. Every diversification since has been in one way or another a direct answer to that one honest sentence. Number 10. Every planning refusal the council has ever handed Clarkson has functioned, whether they intended it or not, as an unpaid script for the next series. They refused the car park. They shut down the restaurant. They declined application after application, citing the area of outstanding natural beauty and the disturbance of a quiet rural setting. What none of them quite grasped was that every refusal became an episode. Every enforcement notice became a storyline, watched by millions, which drew still more visitors to the very operation the council was attempting to restrain. They believed themselves to be the regulatory authority. In practice, they were co-writers on one of the most watched shows on the platform. Number 11. Hawkstone Lager's very first television advert never actually aired. Nor did the second, nor the third. The first was thrown out for a rather choice word Clarkson used the moment he tasted his own product. The second was rejected for claiming the beer was better than Birmingham, an entire city, apparently, requiring protection from a lager slogan. The third fell because it showed him drinking before work, which the regulator judged an endorsement of irresponsible drinking. 3 adverts made, 3 adverts banned. For most new brands, that's a marketing budget burned to nothing before launch. For Clarkson, it turned out to be the cheapest publicity he never had to pay for. Every headline about a banned advert told the country exactly one thing: there's a new beer and somebody doesn't want you to see it. In this country, that's never a warning. It's an invitation. Number 12. Before it was called Hawkstone, the beer very nearly went to market under an entirely different name: Lager McLegerface. The advertising agency vetoed it on the grounds that it didn't sound remotely premium enough for what they were trying to build. Looking back, it was very possibly the last decision the advertising industry ever got to make about that brand on its own terms. Number 13. In the summer of 2023, a batch of Hawkstone cider began quietly trying to kill its own customers. Fermentation hadn't fully stopped before bottling, and pressure started building inside the glass until some bottles began exploding. Clarkson went straight to social media and told the country the truth in almost exactly these words. There's been a massive mistake, and there's a slim chance some bottles might explode. If yours has this code, open it underwater, pour it away, and get in touch for a refund. It was the precise opposite of a corporate crisis statement, and rather remarkably, sales went up afterwards. Audiences, it seems, forgive almost anything if you're honest enough about how badly you've mucked it up. Number 14. The Farmer's Dog pub was built, quite deliberately, to lose money. Clarkson insisted on serving only British produce, which means everything costs considerably more than it would elsewhere. Cornish pepper instead of imported, British beef instead of the cheaper alternative. The pub now employs 146 people, and by Clarkson's own admission, is a brilliant way of turning £100 into roughly 94. The one thing keeping it afloat is his own beer and cider on tap, where he keeps every penny of the margin. The food was never meant to be the profit centre. It was always meant to be the reason people walked through the door in the first place. Number 15. The old Grand Tour tent, the actual travelling marquee from Clarkson's motoring series, the one that toured the world on the back of a lorry, now sits permanently pitched beside the Farmer's Dog, converted into a butcher's shop and an outdoor kitchen. It's television history, quietly repurposed as retail space, and because it's technically a marquee rather than a permanent structure, it sidesteps a good deal of the planning restriction that would apply to anything built from brick. Every visitor who can't get a table inside can still spend money outside it. Nothing on that farm, it turns out, is allowed to simply sit there, being nostalgic. Right, over halfway now. The business side alone is rather extraordinary, isn't it? If you haven't already, this is a good moment to hit subscribe so the next one lands straight in your feed. Now, on to the part where the empire really starts to get away from him. Number 16. When a major international brewer came calling with a reported £50 million offer to buy Hawkstone outright, Clarkson turned it down within 24 hours. No lengthy negotiation, no counter-offer, no consulting a boardroom full of advisors weighing up the numbers. Just a straightforward no, delivered almost as quickly as the offer arrived. And the reasoning, once you sit with it, is rather more sophisticated than it first appears. The moment you strip out the local barley, the transparent brewing process, and the Cotswold farmers standing behind every single pint, you're not left with Hawkstone at all. You're left with just another lager on a shelf, indistinguishable from 100 others, propped up by nothing but a famous face on the label. The model is the brand. You cannot separate the two without destroying the very thing you were trying to buy in the first place. Most celebrity drinks ventures exist to be acquired, folded into a larger portfolio, and quietly forgotten. This one, rather deliberately, was built not to be. Number 17. The farm itself sits on one of the more elegant pieces of tax planning in the country, and Clarkson has been remarkably candid about it, writing openly in his own newspaper column that land is a better investment than any bank can offer him. Agricultural land in Britain passes to your children entirely free of inheritance tax, provided certain conditions are met. Buy a farm worth £6 million, watch it appreciate to 12 over the years, and your children inherit every penny of it, without the taxman taking a single pound off the top. Meanwhile, that same land generates a television show, watched across the globe, hosts a shop turning over well over £1 million a year, supports a brewery worth tens of millions, and provides the backdrop for practically everything else on this list. It is, depending on how uncharitably you'd like to view it, either shrewd financial planning wearing a wax jacket and a slightly bewildered expression, or simply farming done properly and profitably for the first time in a generation. Perhaps it's both. The countryside has always rewarded people who understand it on more than one level at once. Number 18. In 2026, Diddley Squat is set to host the Cereals Agricultural Trade Event, expecting somewhere in the region of 30,000 professional farmers through the gate across a couple of days, which is a rather remarkable turn of events for a farm that made precisely £144 of profit in its very first year of operation, less by some estimates than the cost of the diesel used to plough the fields that produced it. The bloke who once didn't know which end of a tractor did what, who was gently, repeatedly corrected by a 21-year-old for an entire series, is now by any reasonable measure hosting the industry itself. Actual working farmers, the sort who've spent their whole lives doing this properly, travelling to Diddley Squat to see how it's done. There's a version of this story where that sentence reads as satire. Increasingly, it just reads as fact. Number 19. Long before any of this, Clarkson was sacked from the biggest motoring programme on television over an altercation involving a cold steak after a long day's filming. A story that at the time felt like the natural, inevitable ending for a man who'd spent 2 decades treating controversy the way most people treat their morning tea. Loud, combustible. The sort of figure you either adored without reservation or found thoroughly exhausting, with remarkably little comfortable middle ground on offer. It was painted, fairly reasonably, as the final predictable blow-up from someone who'd been building towards exactly this moment for years. Nobody watching that story unfold, nobody reading the headlines at the time, could have reasonably predicted where it eventually led. A muddy field in Oxfordshire. A cast of genuinely unimpressed farmers who couldn't care less who he used to be on television. And somehow, against every reasonable expectation, the quiet rehabilitation of a reputation that by rights should have been entirely unsalvageable. He didn't perform the vulnerability that turned it around. He simply had some, on camera, at regular intervals, and Britain has always been rather defenceless against that particular combination. Number 20. 5 years after Hawkston's adverts were banned from British television altogether, one after another, without exception, the brand bought the single most expensive advertising slot of the entire year, the final break before England opened their World Cup campaign against Croatia, the most watched, most costly minute of airtime the country had to offer. And here's the detail that makes it properly delicious. The advert wasn't fronted by Clarkson at all. It starred Caleb, the same boy who once fed his own calves for 50 pence an hour, who'd never auditioned for anything in his life. Diving through the air in slow motion to save a falling pint, his entire farming life flashing past in a montage of mud, sweat and graft, all building to a single line. Hard to make, easy to drink. 40 seconds. Not a single word banned by anyone, not a single regulation contravened. Clarkson, the man whose own mouth got the very first advert thrown out 5 years earlier, stayed deliberately out of shot entirely and let the farm manager carry the biggest stage in British advertising completely on his own. It was, by any measure, the longest possible way of proving a point. And it landed rather harder for having taken 5 years to arrive. 9 days after that advert aired, Clarkson was somewhere over the Atlantic, flying home from watching England at the World Cup, when he pulled out his phone and gave British farmers the news himself. British Airways, he announced, was now serving Hawkston on board, not tucked away in the first-class cabinet, but on the everyman's trolley, in the everyman's seat, on short-haul flights across the country. A beer that couldn't get 30 seconds on a regional television channel 5 years earlier was now being poured at 30,000 feet by the national flag carrier. Nobody in advertising planned that ending. Clarkson simply refused to accept the one they'd handed him. We began with a man sacked over a cold steak, who bought a farm nobody expected him to understand, and somehow turned every single humiliation, the banned adverts, the exploding cider, the illegal restaurant, the council refusals, into the very fuel that built the whole thing. The council thought they held the leverage. They were, without ever quite realising it, writing his scripts for him. The advertising watchdog thought a ban was a punishment. It turned out to be the finest marketing money couldn't buy, and Caleb, quietly, without ever meaning to steal the show, ended up carrying the biggest advert of the year entirely on his own shoulders. That's the real story hiding underneath all 20 of these facts. Not a celebrity playing at farming for the cameras. A man who kept failing, in public, on purpose or otherwise, and refused every single time to be embarrassed about it. And somehow, out of £144 of profit and a field full of dead trout, built one of the most talked about small businesses in the country. If you enjoyed digging through the mud on this one, you know exactly what to do. Hit like, leave a comment telling me which fact genuinely surprised you, and if you haven't already, subscribe and tap that bell so you never miss the next deep dive here on Britain's Best. We've got plenty more of these coming. The people, the places, and the peculiarly British stories behind them, told properly, the way they deserve to be told. Until next time, take care of yourselves. And if you ever do find yourself queuing at Diddly Squat, do let us know in the comments whether the honey was worth the wait. Thank you, as always, for watching.